For many gamers today, the idea of a world without E3 feels strange. For nearly 3 decades, it was the single event that defined the future of video games. It was where the biggest announcements were made, where industry legends walked on stage, and where moments that shaped childhoods unfolded in front of massive cheering crowds. But before E3 became the heart of gaming, the industry had to survive inside an event that was never designed for it, and that place was the Consumer Electronics Show. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, CES was the largest technology expo in the United States. It featured televisions, stereos, camcorders, early computers, and new electronics of every kind. Video games were considered a minor attraction. Nintendo, Sega, Atari, and dozens of smaller developers had their newest titles scattered throughout the show floor, but they were never given the attention or respect they needed. CES organizers assigned gaming companies to the least desirable areas. Some were placed in parking lot tents. Others were pushed into temporary outdoor structures with no air conditioning and very little security. These tents were notorious for leaking. During one CES event, a rainstorm drenched several displays owned by Sega, ruining equipment and soaking carpets. Nintendo employees complained about mud, humidity, and poor lighting. This treatment sent a clear message. CES did not see the video game industry as a priority, but the industry itself was growing rapidly. By the early 1990s, it was generating billions of dollars and beginning to surpass the movie industry in annual revenue. Developers wanted their own spotlight. They needed an event that treated games as a serious part of entertainment, not an afterthought shoved between TVs and stereo equipment. This frustration led to conversations about whether the gaming world needed a dedicated expo. The idea began forming around executives from the Interactive Digital Software Association, the organization that would later become the Entertainment Software Association. They realized that as long as gaming relied on CES, it would never be given the scale or the presentation it deserved. So they created a brand new trade show entirely focused on video games. In 1995, the Electronic Entertainment Expo was officially born. The first E3 took place in Los Angeles, and from the moment it opened its doors, it became clear this new expo was exactly what the industry needed. Tens of thousands of journalists, buyers, developers, and retailers attended. But the highlight of the show was the rivalry that would change gaming forever. Sega was preparing its new console, the Sega Saturn. Sony was preparing the original PlayStation. Both companies used E3 as a battlefield. Sega shocked the audience when it announced the Saturn would be released immediately with a price of $399. The gaming world was stunned, but Sony delivered one of the most legendary moments in gaming history. A representative walked on stage, stepped up to the microphone, and spoke one simple phrase, $299. The audience cheered wildly. That moment sent a shockwave through the industry. It defined the first E3 and solidified the PlayStation as a future powerhouse. That first year proved that E3 was more than just an event. It was a cultural moment. Developers were finally being treated with respect. They had dedicated stages, proper lighting, huge screens, and professional sound systems. There were no leaky tents, no muddy walkways, and no cramped corners next to refrigerator displays. Instead, gaming had a home that matched its size and influence. The late 1990s became a period of rapid growth for E3. Each year felt bigger and more intense. Companies saved their biggest announcements for the event. The Nintendo 64 made its presence known through E3. The original PlayStation continued to dominate headlines with new titles. PC gaming surged forward with groundbreaking technology and 3D acceleration cards that were showcased with dramatic demonstrations. The expo became known as the place where the future was unveiled. Crowds grew so large that companies invested in elaborate booth designs. Sega built towering displays of Sonic the Hedgehog. Nintendo constructed structures themed around Mario worlds. Sony used massive video walls and futuristic lighting. Developers brought life-size statues, elaborate props, and even small stages for live demonstrations. The competitive energy between companies pushed them to create bigger and more immersive experiences every year. As the 2000s began, E3 reached what many still consider its peak. The PlayStation 2 GameCube, and original Xbox brought a wave of excitement that electrified the expo. Console launches were global events, and E3 was their stage. It was during this era that trailer reveals became cultural moments. Halo 2 stunned audiences with gameplay footage that set a new standard for first person shooters. Metal Gear Solid 2 delivered cinematic trailers that left crowds cheering. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess reveal became so emotional that fans in the auditorium screamed, cried, and jumped to their feet when the trailer ended and Shigeru Miyamoto walked on stage holding the Master Sword and Shield. Developers saved their best surprises for E3 because they knew the entire world was watching. Journalists flew in from multiple continents. Gaming magazines dedicated entire issues to the expo. Television networks like G4 broadcast live coverage. E3 had become the central event that shaped the entire gaming calendar. But while the expo was bigger than ever, trouble was beginning to form behind the scenes. The cost of participating in E3 grew rapidly. Companies were spending millions of dollars to create enormous booths. They hired actors, celebrity guests, dancers, live orchestras, and entire engineering crews to build stages. Some companies even rebuilt entire environments, like medieval villages or futuristic battlefields, just for the show floor. Small and mid-sized developers struggled to match this level of spectacle. Even large publishers began questioning whether the investment was sustainable. As the industry grew, the need for a single annual event began to weaken. Companies wanted more flexibility in their announcement schedules. By 2006 and 2007, the pressure reached a breaking point. The ESA announced a complete restructuring of E3. They cut the event down dramatically. Instead of huge convention center halls, the expo was moved into hotel meeting rooms in Santa Monica. Attendance was limited to a small group of journalists and industry professionals. Gone were the giant booths, the elaborate displays, and the roaring crowds. In their place were quiet conference rooms, small demo setups, and private appointments. This smaller version became known as the E3 downgrade. Many people believed it stripped away the energy and excitement that defined the event. Journalists said the atmosphere felt unenthusiastic. Developers felt the event had lost its identity. Retailers and buyers missed the ability to walk a massive show floor. Fans around the world were disappointed as well because the big stage presentations were smaller and far less dramatic. The ESA quickly realized the downsizing had severely damaged E3's reputation. In 2008, they attempted to rebuild the expo again, moving it back into the Los Angeles Convention Center. But even with the larger space restored, attendance did not return to the levels of the early 2000s. Big companies had begun to change how they interacted with the public. The rise of online streaming, increasing development costs, and the shifting landscape of the gaming industry were already altering the role E3 played. By the end of 2008, the cracks in the foundation were visible. E3 was still important, but the seeds of its future collapse had already been planted. The next decade would push the expo into a battle it could not win. As E3 moved into 2009 and returned to the Los Angeles Convention Center, the expo tried to rebuild the excitement it once had. The show floor expanded, the major stages came back, and the crowds grew larger again. Many people saw this year as a soft reboot, a chance for E3 to reclaim its dominant place in the gaming world. There was a renewed sense of energy, and for a brief moment, it felt like the event had regained its momentum. This comeback era produced some memorable moments. Microsoft showed off Project Natal, which later became known as the Kinect. Sony revealed major PlayStation 3 exclusives and pushed its new motion control technology. Nintendo delivered strong presentations featuring games like Super Mario Galaxy 2 and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Attendance increased, and gaming magazines once again filled their issues with E3 coverage. But beneath the excitement, the industry was changing at a fundamental level. During the 2010s, digital communication became more powerful than ever. YouTube, Twitch, and social media created a world where companies no longer needed to rely on a single annual expo to reach their audience. For decades, E3 had been the only place where millions of gamers learned about new products. But now a trailer posted online could reach those same millions instantly without the cost of a massive event. Nintendo recognized this shift earlier than anyone else. In 2011, they quietly began experimenting with online presentations. Then in 2012, they made a bold decision. Instead of a live E3 stage show, they released a pre recorded video announcement called a Nintendo Direct. This format allowed them to control the message, edit out mistakes, add humor, include developers directly, and release presentations throughout the year. It was cheaper, easier, and more flexible, and it worked. Fans loved it. Millions watched every time a new direct dropped. This moment marked a turning point. If Nintendo no longer needed E3 to communicate with fans, other companies had to question whether they needed it either. Sony took this idea even further. By the mid 2010s, Sony began hosting their own events, such as the PlayStation Experience. These events allowed them to focus exclusively on their own brand rather than competing for attention at E3. In 2019, Sony made a shocking announcement. They would not attend E3 at all. It was the first major sign that the Expo's influence was fading. Microsoft continued to support E3 for a few more years, but even they began shifting their strategy. They opened the Microsoft Theater across the street from the convention center and held their presentations there instead of inside the E3 building. It was a sign that even though they were participating, they were slowly detaching themselves from the Expo's structure. Meanwhile, the cost of E3 remained high. Companies spent millions on booth construction, transportation, staff, and marketing. As digital live streams proved cheaper and more effective, publishers increasingly questioned the value of building a giant physical booth every year. E3 responded by trying to reinvent itself yet again. In 2017, the Expo opened its doors to the general public. For the first time, regular gamers could buy tickets and experience the show floor in person. The ESA hoped that larger crowds would boost the event, and while the attendance numbers did rise, the change introduced new problems. Lines became extremely long. Games that normally required 10 minutes to play now required 3-hour waits. Journalists and industry professionals complained that they could not reach their meetings because the hallways were overcrowded. Developers found it harder to have private business discussions, which had always been one of the primary purposes of E3 in the first place. At the same time, the gaming world continued to evolve. Influencers and live streamers began occupying larger spaces at the show, which changed the tone of the event. Some longtime members of the industry felt E3 was becoming more chaotic and less professionally focused. Others argued that opening the show to fans was a good step, but the Expo struggled to balance both identities at once. Then came the disaster of 2019. An error on the ESA's website exposed the personal information of thousands of journalists who had attended E3. Names, phone numbers, home addresses, and private details were accidentally made public. This massive leak caused outrage across the gaming industry. Many journalists publicly stated that they would never attend E3 again because they no longer trusted the event to keep them safe. This mistake severely damaged E3's reputation. It also came at the worst possible time because the industry was already shifting away from large physical events. But the most devastating blow came in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic spread worldwide, shutting down travel, gatherings, and conferences of every kind. E3 2020 was canceled entirely. With no physical event and no digital backup plan, the Expo disappeared for the year. And something unexpected happened. The gaming industry kept moving forward without it. Sony held its own digital events. Nintendo continued releasing directs. Microsoft created new streaming showcases. Ubisoft held Ubisoft Forward. EA released their own live stream presentations. Developers discovered that hosting their own events was easier, cheaper, and just as effective as attending E3. They no longer needed the Expo, and for many companies, returning in the future no longer made sense. That same year, Jeff Keighley, the creator of the Game Awards, launched Summer Game Fest. It was designed as a digital celebration of gaming that lasted throughout the summer. It combined announcements from multiple publishers into one unified schedule. It cost far less than E3, reached a huge online audience, and did not require physical attendance. Over the next few years, Summer Game Fest grew larger and more respected, filling the space that E3 once dominated. E3 tried to return in 2021 with a digital only format, but the event felt unorganized and lacked the excitement people expected. Many major companies chose not to participate. In 2022, the expo was canceled again. Its future looked uncertain, but the ESA attempted one final revival attempt in 2023. They partnered with ReedPop, the company behind PAX and New York Comic Con, to redesign E3 into a modern hybrid event. The goal was to bring back big publishers, restore excitement, and combine consumer experiences with business meetings. But this plan failed before the expo even opened. Ubisoft pulled out, Sega withdrew, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo all confirmed they were not coming. Without the major companies, E3 lost its purpose. In March 2023, the expo was canceled again. By late 2023, the writing was on the wall. The ESA released a confirmation that E3 was permanently shut down. After nearly 3 decades of shaping the gaming world, the Electronic Entertainment Expo was officially dead. The fall of E3 was not caused by one event, but a combination of many forces working together. Costs grew too large for companies to justify. Digital live streams replaced the need for a physical expo. Social media made it possible to share news instantly. The journalist leak damaged trust. COVID-19 exposed how unnecessary the event had become. And new digital celebrations like Summer Game Fest took over the role E3 once held. Despite its collapse, the legacy of E3 remains powerful. It was the place where the world witnessed the birth of the PlayStation, the rise of Halo, the return of Zelda, and countless unforgettable moments. It was the stage that showed gamers what the future would look like. For nearly 30 years, it was the heartbeat of the gaming world. Even though it is gone, the energy it created continues to influence modern presentations, digital events, and the way companies reveal their biggest surprises. The Electronic Entertainment Expo shaped an entire generation of gamers, and while its final years were filled with struggle, its legacy will always remind people of a time when one event brought the entire gaming world together under one roof. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.